All right, tonight we're going to be talking about the very crucial Vladimir Putin-Donald Trump talk. On the show tonight, I'm joined by Oleksiy Goncharenko. He's a Ukrainian MP and president of the PACE Committee on Migration, Refugees and Displaced Persons, as well as Ben Aris, founder and editor-in-chief, BNE, former bureau chief for Daily Telegraph, joining us from Moscow. Good evening and namaskar to both of you, gentlemen. Let me just quickly tell our viewers what's been happening, and then we'll start our discussion. Viewers, the much-anticipated call between President Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump is underway as we speak amid the U.S. president's promise to end the war. This is, remember, the first known phone call between the two leaders since Ukraine agreed to a U.S.-mediated 30-day ceasefire proposal in Saudi Arabia exactly 1 week earlier. Putin had rejected the proposal the very next day, saying he agreed with the idea, but certain nuances needed to be worked out. Sources say that Vladimir Putin has demanded a halt on all weapons deliveries to Ukraine during the 30-day ceasefire. On the other hand, Ukraine, remember, had urged Russia to agree to an unconditional ceasefire before the Trump-Putin call. Ukraine itself has reiterated that any peace agreement should include no recognition of Russian annexations, no restrictions on Ukraine's armed forces, and no Russian veto on Ukraine's EU and NATO membership. The White House, meanwhile, said they are optimistic that peace is within reach. Earlier on, Donald Trump said swaps of land and power plants will be part of this conversation with Putin amid the fact that thousands of people in central Ukraine are without electricity after a countrywide Russian drone attack that damaged critical infrastructure. While US and Russia might be having this conversation for peace, Ukraine's European allies are not likely to agree to Russian terms. In fact, in the last few weeks, the EU and Britain have stepped up their efforts to deliver fresh military aid packages to Kyiv. So all eyes remain on what transpires in these talks. Let me quickly go across to my guests and start with you, Oleksiy Goncharenko. What do you expect from these talks? Do you think Russia would agree to the kind of deal that was made between America and Ukraine last week?
That would be great. We want peace. We in Ukraine want peace as soon as possible. The whole world is looking for peace. So I hope that Putin will accept it and will be leveraged by Trump. Because Putin himself doesn't want peace, but I think under pressure from the United States, he can agree on this. About Ukraine, you said absolutely right. We want peace, but we will never accept surrender. That means that there are red lines which are important for us, non-recognition of Ukrainian territories as Russian occupied territories. Second thing is sovereignty, meaning that Ukraine makes its own sovereign choices about what army to have, what alliances to join. And number three is security guarantees. These are things which are important for us. So any deal inside these three things, we should agree.
All right. Ben Aris, you want to come in on this? What are you expecting from these talks that are currently underway as we speak? They started at 10 a.m. EDT, which is about 7:30 p.m. Indian Standard Time. Basically, more than 2 hours now that these talks have been going on.
Yeah, they've got a lot to talk about, haven't they? I think the first thing to highlight is that the window of opportunity here for Putin is relatively small, but there's quite a major opportunity available to him in so much as Trump is famous for being impatient and hasn't got a long attention span. He's made it perfectly crystal clear that he wants to bring this conflict to an end quickly. And so a lot of what they're talking about today will be the big pieces of a deal. And Putin's going to need to agree or get Trump to agree to the big things because he's not really going to have many opportunities if he's going to have another opportunity at all to talk to Trump and persuade him of his point of view. I would disagree slightly with Oleksiy saying that Putin doesn't want peace, although I'd frame it slightly differently. The war after 3 years, they've managed to capture, 20% of the country. But they're not going any further. I mean, the Russians are making progress on the battlefield. They've just retaken Kursk. They've made progress around Pokrovsk, which is a very key logistics hub, very strategically important. But they haven't got anywhere further, and they're not going to get any further. The idea of Russia conquering all of Ukraine is at this point, impossible. So Putin needs to stop. He's throwing a
You
lot
know,
of
Ben,
resources in.
but the fact of the matter is that 20% territory of Ukraine might be under Russian control right now, but Russia is refusing to give that up. And that is
Yeah.
where probably one of the biggest stalemates also lies. Ukraine wants its territory back. It doesn't want any recognition of that territory as being
Right.
under Russia.
So that's one of the major topics that's being talked about now is the issue of sovereignty. And while the Ukraine side and even in the Istanbul talks 3 years ago, the Russian side were suggesting that there could be a de facto ceasefire with a demilitarized zone and then kick the issue of sovereignty down the road. I think now that Putin is pushing very hard for recognition of Russian sovereignty, A, over the Crimea, and B, over the 4 regions that were annexed. And that's something that the Ukrainian side, that Zelensky specifically has ruled out. They will not accept that. And the danger, this is why I think in Kiev they're so nervous, is they're afraid that Trump might make concessions there. The Russian press today was speculating that Trump might acknowledge Russia's sovereignty over Crimea, at least, which would be a huge win for Putin. But I think he also wants to see this declaration of sovereignty or recognition of the other 4 regions. And that's going to be very problematic because they were quite clearly annexed, and some of them, like Kherson, are not even remotely Russian, whereas you could argue that Crimea is more or less Russian.
Sure. Oleksiy, you want to come in on this? The fact that, Russia has time and again reiterated its own demands of how it wants to have a peace deal with Ukraine. No NATO membership, Crimea will not be returned, pre-2014 territories will not be returned, they will not go back to the original demarcations. All of these demands have been put forth. Is Ukraine even considering them? I mean, we understand that there is no acceptance at the moment, but is it even being considered that perhaps, say, for example, the NATO membership can be sort of considered a bit later? Let's focus on bringing in peace right now.
Yeah, it is considered, first of all, about membership in NATO. We can't decide ourselves to become member of NATO. If NATO is not ready to take Ukraine, to accept Ukraine, Ukraine will not become member of NATO. I'm speaking about our sovereign choice to knock at the doors of NATO. That's what's important for us, because NATO is important, very important, the most important military alliance in the world, but there are possibly other military alliances. We need to have our sovereign right to move where we want to. But another question is, will we be accepted there or not? Second thing about territories, I see here quite misunderstanding. I want to explain what does it mean. Can we kick out Russians today from our territories? Unfortunately, with this level of Western support, no. Does it mean that Russia will continue to control these territories after end of hostilities, if they will end now? Yes. But does it mean that they will be recognized as Russians? No. That's the story. They are illegally occupied. Even if Russia will continue to de facto control them for some years ahead, I don't know how many, it depends from many things, it doesn't make them Russian. That's important. That's important for Ukraine. So our territorial integrity, which is violated de facto, should be secured de jure. That this is in the right internationally recognized borders. If in any way United States or any other our big allies and big countries in the world will come to recognition of this Russian occupation, that will be the end of the world order as it is. And that will be the beginning of a huge massacre in the world. Because if you can change the borders like this, I'm afraid to imagine what will start in different parts of the world.
Okay. Ben, as far as we knew and the world perceived Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, they were thought to be close to each other, if not the greatest of friends, at least in public life. But that was the public perception. But in the last few weeks, Donald Trump has taken a rather stern stance towards Russia. At times he's talking about sanctioning Russia. At times he's saying, I will have the power to do things financially against Russia if it does not agree to the peace deal with Ukraine. How much of that would sort of play in today's conversation? Do you think it's going to figure the kind of sternness that Donald Trump has been showing, at least publicly?
Absolutely. I mean, my understanding of Trump, and I'm not an expert on US politics, but he sees himself first and foremost as the world's greatest deal maker. And if you're going to make a deal, then you have carrots and sticks. And he's going into this deal. He prefers blunt tools. I mean, we see this with the bombing of the Houthis in Yemen, that they're not complying. They're shooting at ships, and so he's just bombing the hell out of them. And the threat, and this is the problem, this is why I was saying the window, the opportunity for Putin is rather small, because he has this chemistry with Trump, and Trump clearly doesn't like Zelensky. However, that chemistry, that friendship between them allows them to do a negotiated deal. But if Putin crosses him, if he denies him his deal, for example, by refusing to do this 30-day ceasefire, then Trump will use his stick. And his stick is a significant escalation of sanctions. The Biden administration introduced some very painful oil sanctions at the end of last year that actually worked. They're the first ones that have been effective. Similarly, on the banking sector. And those will really hurt. And Putin, it's not that he doesn't want peace. He wants the end of the war. He wants the end of the spending. He wants to secure his security. And at the same time, he needs to wind down the military machine and that's hurting the Russian economy. And so he's going to have to make concessions. And Trump is going to use these sticks, particularly escalating the sanctions, if he doesn't get what he wants. And Putin realizes, I think, he needs to make the decision, probably now in this conversation, to make those concessions to keep Trump on board, because otherwise, Trump being the deal maker, if he doesn't get his deal, he's going to get angry and he's going to hit out.
And that's what he's made very clear, in fact, not just internationally, to be coming off as a peacemaker. He's spoken about that time and again, but also to cater to his domestic voters. One of his biggest promises during the presidential campaign was to end the wars. So we'll have to wait and watch whether he's able to achieve that. But Oleksiy, the same question to you. As far as Ukraine is concerned, do you think there is hope that Trump will be able to pressurize Vladimir Putin into agreeing to the kind of conditions that Ukraine and US had made in Saudi Arabia last week?
I think so. I think President Trump can do this. And fingers crossed that he will do this. Okay. That's the only way to peace, because if President Trump will come with any idea of the deal which is not inside Ukrainian red lines, which are already mentioned, Ukraine will not accept it. That's all. It's not American forces which are fighting. It's Ukrainian forces which are fighting. We don't have any boots on the ground, just Ukrainian army which is fighting against Russian army. So if these will not be on the terms which are acceptable for us, then nothing will happen.
Okay. Oleksiy, many also say that after the talks in Saudi Arabia last week, people were talking about how the ball is in Russia's court now. But many also argue that the ball is also in Ukraine's court. Why can't Ukraine agree to the kind of demands that Russia has? Because Russia has to protect its own national security, own territorial security and sovereignty of the country. It's not just Ukraine which has to fight that.
What is the threat to Russian national security from Ukraine? I mean, Ukraine never attacked Russia, and never even to imagine this. It's hard to imagine this. We are country.
That's the argument that Russia has always given, that Ukraine shouldn't become a member of NATO.
That is a false argument. Finland has bigger border with Russia than Ukraine has, and Finland is member of NATO. And so what? In many other countries, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, they're members of NATO. They have border with Russia. So what? So what is the threat from them to Russia? What in general can be threat to nuclear power from another country which is not a nuclear power? It's crazy. It's a false argument. Russia is just trying to take the land. Russia is acting as a colonial empire. They just want Ukraine back as a part of their colonial empire. That's all. That's all what Russia wants. All other arguments are completely false. Ukraine never attacked Russia. Ukraine never posed any threat to Russia. Ukraine is ready for peace right now, even for ceasefire. Let's do it right now without any I don't know conditions and anything. So the only country which wants the war, continues this war, is Russia. That's very easy.
Ben, do you want to come in on this? Do you agree with what Oleksiy is saying?
I agree absolutely that there was no danger of NATO attacking Russia per se. But look, I've been following Putin since he first came into office 20 years, and what you have to understand here is not the potential attack by NATO on Ukraine on Russia from Ukraine. It's Putin's understanding of it that's the problem here. And in this sense, it's very Soviet thinking, that it's old Cold War thinking. He was formerly KGB, he was a Soviet officer, and he has this bee in the bonnet about the potential threat of NATO, which was set up specifically to fight against the Soviet Union. And since the end of the Cold War, now has repurposed itself, specifically to fight against Russia, as Putin sees it. And that's what he's looking for. The Gorbachev was promised there would be no NATO expansion to the east. It's a matter of record now. And he said, Putin in 2007 in Munich, that these promises were broken and that he complained very loudly about the continuing expansion. And so this is all about Putin's ego, in the same way that it's all about Trump's ego in the negotiations, that Putin has this bee in the bonnet that he doesn't want to see NATO troops in Ukraine, NATO missiles on the eastern border that have 5-minute flight times to more than half a dozen of Russia's biggest cities, which is indefendable. 5 minutes, you can't stop those missiles. And so he's made it like, a bête noire for him that to exclude Ukraine's membership from NATO. And consequently, we've got into this war as a result of that. And the irony is, like, from day one, there was never any intention to let Ukraine join NATO. And Mark Rutte, the new chairman, said explicitly, it was never even thought about allowing Ukraine into NATO. And as Oleksiy said, you can knock on the door, but they're not going to let you in. And this is again on the table now, that I think we're going to end up in a Finlandization solution, where, because it's been made clear that Ukraine can't join NATO, won't join NATO, that it has to go back to the neutrality that it had in the constitution prior to 2014, and Russia will accept that. But then that's a very uncomfortable position for Ukraine, because it doesn't prevent, or it means there's no help should Russia reinvade, a second invasion in, say, 2 years' time.
But Ben, a lot of supporters of Russia say that Russia has been correct in saying that it has a threat from NATO, because in the past it has had experiences where NATO has broken its trust, and therefore the kind of move that Vladimir Putin makes now.
NATO is
what experiences?
NATO is a defensive organization. However, in the case in Serbia and in the case in Libya,
Ben, go ahead, and then Oleksiy, I'll come to you.
I was saying that NATO is a defensive organization, and so therefore doesn't necessarily or de facto pose a threat to Russia. Nevertheless, there has been occasions in Syria and also in Serbia where NATO was on the offensive. It fought offensive campaigns. And the Russians Lavrov in particular, keep pointing this out, so that they don't entirely trust it. Having said that, I don't think there's anybody who wants to start a third world war. Russia because it has nuclear weapons, and you can't fight a country with nuclear weapons, so it's not going to happen. Hand to Oleksiy.
Okay, Oleksiy, go ahead.
It's a false statement from Russia. What trust between Russia? Once again, just maybe not all your viewers know this. So, Ukraine is independent from 1991. Russia, several times by treaties ratified by Russian parliament, recognized Ukrainian borders several times. In 1994, Ukraine voluntarily gave up nuclear weapons because at that time, we had the third biggest nuclear arsenal in the world. Under pressure from the United States, United Kingdom, and Russia, we gave these nukes to Russia under the guarantees that they will never attack us. And that's exactly what they did in 2014. Now they continue, the war continues for 11 years, not for 3 years, for 11 years. In 2022, they started a full-scale invasion. So when you're saying the word trust and when you're saying the word Russia, they can't be together. If we're speaking about trust and who is betraying trust, it's Russia. They're doing it all the time, and they continue to do this. And never ever, no Ukraine, no United States, no any other NATO country attacked Russia. These had not happened. But quite opposite, it happened in Ukraine. Not only Russia is also making hybrid attacks, killing people in United Kingdom and Salisbury, in Germany, attacking military depots, making hybrid war, making cyber attacks. All of this is done by Russia. So Russia is the source of this instability and aggression, unfortunately, on the planet. So that's all.
All right. All right, so we'll have to wait and watch how this really moves forward. That conversation's still underway. It's been 2.5 hours now that both the leaders have been talking. Let's see what transpires in that conversation. But I'll leave it there. Thank you very much to both of you gentlemen, Oleksiy Goncharenko and Ben Aris, for joining us on Global Mirror and sharing your perspectives. Thank you very much. With that, ladies and gentlemen, it's a wrap on Global Mirror. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. Bye-bye. Up next is Sneha Koshi with Beyond the Headline.